Welcome, I am Daisy, your hostess. In this video, we're going to explore the secret science behind miracles by Max Freedom Long, as presented through his lens of the Hawaiian culture. This will be a series of videos, so if you are new to my channel, I invite you to subscribe so you can be notified as I bring to you each consecutive chapter. The author explores the esoteric and mystical aspects of ancient spiritual practices, focusing on the kahuna and their knowledge of mental and spiritual powers. The term kahuna, I like saying that word, literally means keeper of hidden knowledge and describes key persons in the community who provide spiritual leadership. Some offer medical care through traditional practices and plant medicine. Others have expertise in areas such as agriculture, architecture, and astronomical observation. Very similar to the high priests and priestesses of other ancient cultures. I was thinking about the author in this book. It seems like there was an unknown force driving him to move to Hawaii, because as you will learn, he moved from the United States to Hawaii to teach elementary school on a 3-year contract, and slowly became obsessed with discovering Huna. Huna is the ancient Hawaiian system of wisdom, self-empowerment, and healing. After many years, the author concluded that Huna is something that you do. It is not something that you believe in. It is not a religion, not occult or a cult. Huna is a method, a tool, which it took him some time to realize that while the ancients did not have the words for it, Huna is made up of a psychological system based on ancient Hawaiian ideas. But Huna is not a Hawaiian system or even a Hawaiian religion. It is simply a way of life. I've never been to Hawaii, and this book has offered me an opportunity to learn more of the culture and its peoples. Before I turn the page, if you can bear with me to honor these people and its culture, I'd like to share an excerpt written by Queen Liliuokalani, Queen of Hawaii. She lived from 1838 to 1917. The last Hawaiian monarch. I've left links in the description of this video for you to check out. And also the song you heard here is titled Aloha Oe, which means farewell to thee. It was written by Queen Liliuokalani in 1878. It was intended to be a love song. 20 years later, she used this song as a farewell to Hawaii, as Hawaii lost its independence despite Native Hawaiians' extensive resistance. The United States, annexed Hawaii in 1898. I share this excerpt in honor of these people and to better understand the heart of Hawaii culture as we explore, as the words of the author bring us closer to a better understanding Hawaiian Huna. Lest we forget as a nation to take care that which we claim to bring under protection because we think our system is better, that our God is better, and that our politics is better, only to end up destroying something beautiful. It's sad to hear in this letter that the Queen saw the ugly side of the United States press as well. You can find the full book written that same year of 1898 titled Hawaii's Story. And here are some excerpts from her book written by the Hawaiian Queen Liliuokalani. Quote, "Few remarks I feel called upon to make from my own, and that is to say, the native Hawaiian standpoint. I shall not claim that in the days of Captain Cook our people were civilized. I shall not claim anything more for their progress in civilization and Christian morality than has been already attested by missionary writers. Perhaps I may safely claim even less, admitting the criticism of some intelligent visitors who were not missionaries, that the habits and prejudices of New England Puritanism were not well adapted to the genius of a tropical people, nor capable of being thoroughly engrafted upon them. While 4/5 of the population of our island was swept out of existence by the vices introduced by foreigners, the ruling class clung to Christian morality and gave its unvarying support and service to the work of saving and civilizing the masses? But will it also be thought strange that education and knowledge of the world have enabled us to perceive that as a race, we have some special mental and physical requirements not shared by the other races which come among us? That certain habits and modes of living are better for our health and happiness than others? And that a separate nationality and a particular form of government, as well as special laws, are, at least for the present, best for us? And these things remain to us until the pitiless and tireless annexation policy was effectively backed by the naval power of the United States. To other usurpations of authority on the part of those who love for the institutions of their native land, we could understand and forgive we had submitted. We had allowed them virtually to give us a constitution and control the office of state, not without protest indeed. For the usurpation was unrighteous and cost us much humiliation and distress, but we did not resist it by force. It had not entered into our hearts to believe that these friends and allies from the United States, even with all their foreign affinities, would ever go so far as to absolutely overthrow our form of government, seize our nation by the throat. And while we sought by peaceful political means to maintain the dignity of the throne and to advance national feeling among the native people, we never sought to rob any citizen, wherever born, of either property, franchise, or social standing. I am able to say, and with absolute authority, that the native people of Hawaii are entirely faithful to their own chiefs and are deeply attached to their own customs. And just here let me say that I have felt much perplexity over the attitude of the American press, that great vehicle of information for the people, in respect of Hawaiian affairs. Shakespeare has said, "It is excellent to have giant strength, but it is tyrannous to use it like a giant." It is not merely that. With few exceptions, the press has seemed to favor the extinction of Hawaiian sovereignty, but that it has often treated me with coarse allusions and flippancy, and almost uniformly has commented upon me adversely, or has declined to publish letters from myself and friends conveying correct information upon matters which other correspondents had, either willfully or through being deceived, misrepresented. Let it be understood that I have not failed to notice it, and to be not only flattered by its universality, but further very grateful that I have had the opportunity to know the real American people, quite distinct from those who have assumed this honored name when it suited their selfish ends. But for the Hawaiian people, for the 40,000 of my own race and blood, descendants of those who welcomed the devoted and pious missionaries of 70 years ago, for them, has this mission of mine accomplished anything? Oh, honest Americans, as Christians, hear me for my downtrodden people. Their form of government is as dear to them as yours is precious to you. Quite as warmly as you love your country, so they love theirs, with all your goodly possessions covering a territory so immense that there yet remains parts unexplored, possessing islands that, although near at hand, had to be neutral ground in time of war. Do not covet the little vineyard of Naboths, so far from your shores, lest the punishment of Ahab fall upon you, if not in your day, in that of your children. For be not deceived, God is not mocked. The people to whom your fathers told of the living God, and taught to call Father, and whom the sons now seek to despoil and destroy, are crying aloud to him in their time of trouble, and he will keep his promise, and will listen to the voices of his Hawaiian children lamenting for their homes. It is for them that I would give the last drop of my blood. It is for them that I would spend, nay, am spending, everything belonging to me. Will it be in vain? It is for the American people and their representatives in Congress to answer these questions. As they deal with me and my people, kindly, generously, and justly, so may the great ruler of all nations deal with the grand and glorious nation of the United States of America. End excerpt. And as we embark on this adventure, may those that have eyes to see and ears to hear find that which you seek. Perhaps the Hawaiian Huna will be revealed to you. I now turn the page. The Secret Science Behind Miracles by Max Freedom Long. Chapter 1. The Discovery That May Change the World. And this report deals with the discovery of an ancient and secret system of workable magic, which, if we can learn to use it as did the native magicians of Polynesia and North Africa, bids fair to change the world, provided the atom bomb doesn't make all further changes impossible. As a young man, I was a Baptist. I attended the Catholic Church often with a boyhood friend. Later on, I studied Christian Science briefly, took a long look into Theosophy, and ended up by making a survey of all religions whose literatures were available to me. With this background and having majored in psychology at school, I arrived in Hawaii in 1917 and took a job teaching because the position would place me near the volcano Kilauea, which was very active at the time and which I proposed to visit as often as possible. After a 3-day voyage in a small steamer out of Honolulu, I at last reached my school. It was one of 3 rooms and stood in a lonely valley between a great sugar plantation and a vast ranch manned by Hawaiians and owned by a white man who lived most of his life in Hawaii. The 2 teachers under me were both Hawaiian, and it was only natural that I soon began to know more about their simple Hawaiian friends. From the first I began to hear guarded references to native magicians, the kahunas, or keepers of the secret. My curiosity became aroused and I began to ask questions. To my surprise, I found that questions were not welcomed. Behind native life there seemed to lie a realm of secret and private activities which were no business of a curious outsider. Furthermore, I learned that the kahunas had been outlawed since early days when the Christian missionaries became the ruling element in the islands, and that all activities of the kahunas and their clients were strictly sub rosa, at least insofar as a white man was concerned. Rebuffs only whetted my appetite for this strange fare which tasted largely of black superstition, but was constantly spiced to tongue-burning proportions by what appeared to be eyewitness accounts of both the impossible and the preposterous. Ghosts walked scandalously, and they were not confined to the ghosts of deceased Hawaiians. The lesser gods walked as well, and Pele, goddess of the volcanoes, was suspected repeatedly of visiting the natives both by day and by night in the disguise of a strange old woman never seen before in those parts, and given to asking for tobacco, which she got instantly and without question. Then there were the accounts of healing through the use of magic, of magical killings of people guilty of hurting their fellows, and, strangest of all to me, the use of magic to investigate the future of individuals and, if it was not good, change it for the better. This last practice had a Hawaiian name, but was described to me as make-luck business. I had come up through a hard school and was inclined to look with a suspicious eye on anything that savored of superstition. This attitude was reinforced when I received from the Honolulu Library the loan of several books which told what there was to tell about the kahunas. From all accounts, and these had been written almost entirely by the missionaries who had arrived in Hawaii less than a century earlier, the kahunas were a set of evil scoundrels who preyed on the superstitions of the natives. Before the arrival of the missionaries in 1820, there had been a great stone platform throughout the 8 islands, with grotesque wooden idols and stone altars where even human sacrifices were made. There were idols peculiar to each temple and locality. The chiefs had their own personal idols very often, as the famous conqueror of all the islands, Kamehameha I, had his hideous war god with staring eyes and shark's teeth. Near my school, in the district where I was later to teach, there had stood an extra large temple from which each year the priests set forth in procession, carrying the gods for a vacation trip through the countryside and collecting tribute. One of the outstanding features of the idol worship was the amazing set of taboos imposed by the kahunas. Almost nothing at all could be done without the lifting of a taboo and the permission of the priest. As the priests had been backed by the chiefs, the commoners had a difficult time of it. In fact, so great had the imposition of the priest become that the year before the arrival of the missionaries, the head kahuna of them all, Hiwa by name, asked the old queen and the young reigning prince for permission to destroy the idols, break the taboos to the last one, and forbid the kahunas their practices. The permission was granted, and all kahunas of goodwill joined in burning the gods which they had always known were only wood and feathers. The books provided fascinating reading. The high priest, Hiwa, had evidently been a man of parts. He had possessed psychic powers and had been able to look into the future to the extent that he could advise Kamehameha wisely through a campaign that lasted years and ended with the conquering of all other chiefs and the uniting of the islands under one rule. Hiwa was an excellent example of the type of Hawaiians of the upper class who possessed a most surprising ability to absorb new ideas and react to them. This class amazed the world by stepping out of a grass skirt into all the vestments of civilization in less than a generation. Hiwa seems to have spent hardly 5 years in making his personal transition from native customs and ways of thought to those of the white men of the day. But he made one bad mistake in the process. When conservative old Kamehameha died, Hiwa set to work to look into the future, and what he saw intrigued him greatly. He saw white men and their wives arriving in Hawaii to tell the Hawaiians of their god. He saw the spot on a certain beach on one of the 8 islands where they would land to meet the royalty. To a high priest, this was most important. Evidently, he made inquiries of the white seamen then in the islands and was told that the white priest worshipped Jesus, who had taught them to perform miracles, even to raising the dead, and that Jesus had risen from the dead after 3 days. Undoubtedly, the account was properly embroidered for the benefit of the Hawaiian. Convinced that the white men had superior ways, guns, ships, and machines, Hiwa took it for granted that they had a superior form of magic. Realizing the contamination that had overtaken temple kahunaism in the islands, he promptly decided to clear the stage against the arrival of the white kahunas. He acted at once, and the temples were all in ruins when, on October Day in 1820, at the very spot on the very beach which Hiwa had pointed out to his friends and the royal family, the missionaries from New England came ashore. Hiwa met them on the beach and recited to them a fine rhyming prayer of welcome, which he had composed in their honor. In the prayer, he mentioned a sufficient part of the native magic, in veiled terms, to show that he was a magician of no mean powers, and then went on to welcome the new priest and their gods from far high places. Official visits with royalty finished, and the missionaries assigned to various islands with permission to begin their work, Hiwa elected to go with the group assigned to Honolulu. He had already found himself in rather a tight box, however, because it soon developed, the white kahunas possessed no magic at all. They were as helpless as the wooden gods which had been burned. The blind and sick and halt had been brought before them and had been taken away, still blind, still sick, and still halt. Something was amiss. The kahunas had been able to do much better than that, idols or no idols. It developed that the white kahunas needed temples. Hopefully, Hiwa and his men set to work to help build a temple. It was a fine, large one made out of cut stone, and it took a long time to complete. But when it was at last done and dedicated, the missionaries still could not heal, to say nothing of raising the dead as they had been supposed to do. Hiwa had fed the missionaries and befriended them endlessly. His name appeared frequently in their letters and journals, but soon after the church at Waihohinu was finished, His name was erased from the pages of the missionary reports. He had been urged to join the church and become a convert. He had refused, and we can only suppose went back to the use of such magic as he knew and ordered his fellow kahunas back to their healing practices. A few years later, what with Christianity, him singing and reading and writing being accepted by the chiefs in their rapid stride into civilized states, the missionaries outlawed the kahunas. They remained outlawed, but as no Hawaiian police officer or magistrate in his right mind dared arrest a kahuna known to have genuine power, the use of magic continued merrily, behind the backs of the whites, so to speak. Meantime, schools were established, and the Hawaiians slid with incredible speed from savagery into civilization, going to church on a Sunday, singing and praying as loudly as the next, and on Monday going to the deacon, who might be a kahuna on a weekdays, to be healed or to have their future changed if they had found themselves in the midst of a run of bad luck. In isolated districts, the kahunas practiced their arts openly. At the volcanoes, several of them continued to make the ritual offerings to Pele and acted as guides for tourists on the side, often astounding them with a certain magical feat, of which I shall tell in detail very soon. To continue my story, I read the books, decided with their authors that the kahunas possessed no genuine magic, and settled back fairly well satisfied that all the whispered tales I might hear were figments of imagination. The next week, I was introduced to a young Hawaiian who had been to school and who had thought to show his superior knowledge by defying the local native superstition that one might not enter a certain tumbled temple enclosure and defile it. His demonstration took on an unexpected turn, and he found his legs useless under him. His friends carried him home after he had crawled from the enclosure, and after the plantation doctor had failed to help him, he had gone to a kahuna and had been restored by him. I did not believe the tale, but still I had no way of knowing. I asked some of the older white men of the neighborhood what they thought of the kahunas, and they invariably advised me to keep my nose out of their affairs. I asked well-educated Hawaiians and got no advice at all. They simply were not talking. They either laughed off my questions or ignored them. This state of affairs prevailed for me all that year, and the next and the next. I moved to a different school each year, each time finding myself in isolated corners where native life ran a strong undercurrent, and in my third year found myself in a brisk little coffee-growing community with ranchers and native fishermen in the hills and along the beaches. Very quickly I learned that the delightful elderly lady with whom I boarded at a rambling cottage hotel was a minister, and that she preached each Sunday to the largest congregation of Hawaiians in those parts. I further learned that she had no connection with the mission churches or any other, was self-ordained, and peppery on the subject. In due time, I found that she was the daughter of a man who had ventured to try his Christian prayers and faith against the magic of local kahuna, who had challenged him and had promised to pray his congregation of Hawaiians to death one by one, to show that his beliefs were more practical and genuine than the superstitions of the Christians. I even saw the diary of that earnest but misguided gentleman. In it, he reported the death, one by one, of members of his flock, then the sudden desertion of the remaining members. The pages for many days were left blank in the diary at that point, but the daughter told me how the desperate missionary went afield, learned the use of the magic employed in the death prayer, and secretly made the death prayer for the challenging kahuna. The kahuna had not expected such a turning of the tables and had taken no precautions against attack. He died in 3 days. The survivors of the flock rushed back to church, and the diary resumed with the glad tidings of the return. But the missionary was never the same. He attended the next conclave of the mission body in Honolulu and said or did things not recorded in any available records. He may only have answered scandalized charges. In any event, he was churched and never again attended a conclave. But the Hawaiians understood. A princess gave him a strip of land a half-mile wide and running from the breakers to the high mountains. On this land at the beach where Captain Cook landed and was killed hardly 50 years earlier, there stood the remains of one of the finest native temples in the land, the one from which the gods were paraded each year over the road that is still called the Pathway of the Gods. Farther back from the beach, but on the same grant of land, stood the little church of coral stone, which the natives had built with their own hands, and which his daughter was to preside as minister 60 years later. At the beginning of my 4th year in the islands, I moved to Honolulu, and after getting settled, took time out to visit the Bishop Museum, a famous institution founded by Hawaiian royalty and endowed to support a school for children of Hawaiian blood. The purpose of my visit was to try to find someone who could give me an authoritative answer to the question of the kahunas which had plagued me for so long. My bump of curiosity had grown too large to be comfortable, and I harbored an angry desire to have something done about it one way or another, definitely and decisively. I had heard that the curator of the museum had spent most of his years delving into things Hawaiian, and I had the hope that he would be able to give me the truth coldly, scientifically, and in an acceptable form. At the entrance I met a charming Hawaiian woman, a Mrs. Webb, who listened to my blunt statement of the reason for my visit, studied me for a moment, then said, "You'd better go up and see Dr. Brigham. He's in his office on the next floor." Dr. Brigham turned away from his desk, where he was studying some botanical material through a glass, to examine me with friendly blue eyes. He was a great scientist, an authority on his chosen field, recognized and respected in the British Museum for the perfection of his studies and printed reports on them. He was 82, huge, bald, and bearded. He was heavy with the weight of an incredible varied mass of scientific knowledge, and he looked like Santa Claus. See Who's Who in America for 1922-1923 for his record under William Tufts Brigham. I took the chair which he offered, introduced myself, and went swiftly to the questions which had brought me to him. He listened attentively, asked questions about the things I had heard, the places where I had lived, and the people I had come to know. He countered my questions about the kahuna with questions as to what my conclusions had been. I explained that I was quite convinced that it was all superstition or suggestion or poison, but admitted that I needed someone who spoke with the authority of real information to help me quiet the nagging little doubt in the back of my mind. Some time passed. Dr. Brigham almost annoyed me with his questions. He seemed to forget the purpose of my visit and lose himself in the exploration of my background. He wanted to know what I had read, where I had studied, and what I thought about a dozen matters which were quite aside from the question I had raised. I was beginning to grow impatient when he suddenly fixed me with so a stern glance that I was startled. "Can I trust you to respect my confidence?" he asked. "I have a little scientific standing which I wish to preserve." He smiled suddenly, even in the vanity of my old age. I assured him that what he might say would go no farther, then waited. He thought for a moment, and then he said slowly, "For 40 years I have been studying the kahunas to find the answer to the questions you have asked. The kahunas do use what you have called magic. They do heal. They do kill. They do look into the future and change it for their clients. Many were imposters, but some were genuine. Some even used this magic to firewalk across lava overflows barely cooled enough to carry the weight of a man." He broke off abruptly, as if fearing he had said too much. Leaning back in his swivel chair, he watched me moodily through half-closed eyes. "I'm not sure, but I believe I muttered thanks." I half rose from my chair and sank back on it. I must have stared at him blankly for an idiotically long time. My trouble was that there was no wind left in my sails. He knocked the underpinning from under the world I had braced almost to solidity over a period of 3 years. I had confidently expected an official negation of the kahunas, and I had told myself that I would be able to wash my hands completely of them and their superstitions. Now I was back in the trackless swamp, and not up to my ankles as before, but suddenly sunk to the tip of my curious nose in the mire of mystery. I may have made inarticulate noises. I have never been quite sure, but finally I managed to find my tongue. Firewalking? I asked uncertainly. Over hot lava? I never heard of that. I swallowed a few times, then managed to ask, how do they do it? Dr. Brigham's eyes popped open very wide, then narrowed down while his bushy brows climbed toward his bald dome. His white beard began to twitch, and suddenly he leaned back in his chair and let out a roar of laughter which shook the walls. He laughed until tears rolled down his pink cheeks. Forgive me, he gasped at last, placing a placating hand on my knee while he wiped his eyes. The reason your question struck me as so funny was that I have been trying for 40 years to answer it for myself, without success. With that, the ice was broken. Although I had a baffled and hollow feeling at being tossed back into the middle of the very problem I had thought to escape, we fell to talking. The old scientist had also been a teacher. He had a gift of simplicity and a directness in discussing even the most complicated subjects. I did not realize it until weeks afterward, but in that hour he placed his finger on me, claiming me as his own, and like Elijah of old, preparing to cast his mantle across my shoulders before he took his departure. He told me later that he had long watched for a young man to train in the scientific approach, and to whom he could entrust the knowledge he had gained in the field, the new and unexplored field of magic. Often on a warm night, when he sensed my feeling of discouragement over the seeming impossibility of learning the secret magic, he would say, I have hardly made a beginning. Just because I'll never know the answer is no reason why you will not. Just think what's happened in my time. The science of psychology has been born. We know the subconscious. Look at the new phenomena being observed and reported month by month by the societies for psychical research. Keep everlastingly at it. No telling what you may find, a clue, or when some new discovery in psychology will help you to understand why the kahunas observed their various rites and what went on in their minds while they observed them. At other times, he would open his heart to me. He was a great soul and still simple. He had an almost childish yearning to know the secret of the kahunas, and he was getting very old. The sand was almost sure to run out before success came. The kahunas had failed to get their sons and daughters to take the training and learn the ancient lore that was handed down under vows of inviolable secrecy, only from parent to child. Those who could heal instantly or who could firewalk had been gone since the year 1900, many of them old and dear friends. He was left almost alone in a field in which little was left to observe. Moreover, he was a little bewildered. It seemed so absurd to think that he had been able to watch the kahunas work, had become their friend, had firewalked under their protection, and still had not been able to get the slightest inkling as to how they worked their magic, except in the matter of the death prayer, which, as he explained, was not true magic, but a very advanced phenomena of spiritualism. Sometimes we would sit in the darkness with the mosquito punk burning on the lanai, and he would go over various points in review to be sure that I had remembered. Often he would say in ending, I have been able to prove that none of the popular explanations of the kahuna magic will hold water. It is not suggestion, nor anything known in psychology. They use something that we have still not discovered, and this is something inestimably important. We simply must find it. It will revolutionize the world if we can find it. It will change the entire concept of science. It would bring order into conflicting religious beliefs. Always keep watch for three things in the study of this magic. There must be some form of consciousness backup and directing the processes of magic. Controlling the heat in firewalking, for example. There must also be some form of force used in exerting this control, if we can but recognize it. And at last, there must be some form of substance, visible or invisible, through which the force can act. Watch always for these, and if you can find any one, it may lead to the others. And so gradually I took over the materials which he had collected in this strange new field. I became thoroughly familiar with all the negations, all the speculations, and all the verifications. I began the slow work of trying to find remaining kahunas and do what I could to learn from them the secret. Upon hearing a story of what some kahuna had done, my invariable question would be, who told you that? I would begin tracing back, and sometimes I would be able to find the person who had been the subject of the tale and get from him all the smallest details of what had been done. The greatest difficulty was to get an introduction to the kahuna who had exerted the magic. Usually this was utterly impossible. The kahunas had learned by hard knocks to shun the whites, and no Hawaiian dared to bring a white friend to them without their permission, and that was almost never given. 4 years after I met Dr. Brigham, he died, leaving me with a weight on my heart and with the frightened realization that I was perhaps the only white man in the world who knew enough to continue the investigation of the native magic, which was vanishing so rapidly. And if I failed, the world might lose for all time a workable system that would be endlessly valuable to humanity if it could be recovered. With Dr. Brigham, I had been watching hopefully for some new discovery in psychology or in the field of psychic science, and the discouraging as it was, have been forced to admit that both sciences showed signs of becoming stalemate. With over 100 recognized scientists engaged over a period of half a century in psychical research, not a single theory had been evolved which would explain even such simple things as telepathy or suggestion, to say nothing of ectoplasm, a portent materialization. More years passed. I ceased to make progress, and in 1931 I admitted defeat. It was then that I left the islands. In California, I continued half-heartedly to watch for any new psychological discovery that might again open up the problem. None came. Then, in 1935, quite unexpectedly, I awakened in the middle of the night with an idea that led directly to the clue which was eventually to give the answer. If Dr. Brigham had been alive, he certainly would have joined me in a scarlet flush of embarrassment. Both of us had overlooked a clue so simple and so obvious that it had continually passed unnoticed. It was the pair of spectacles pushed up on the forehead while we hunted for hours unable to find them. The idea that had struck me in the middle of the night was that the kahunas must have had names for the elements in their magic. Without such names, they could not have handed down their lore from one generation to the next. As the language they used was Hawaiian, the words must have appeared in that language. And as the missionaries been making the Hawaiian English dictionary as early as 1820, the one still in use, and as they certainly had not known enough about the native magic to translate correctly any names used to describe that magic, it was obvious that any attempted translations would have been either faulty or entirely wrong. The Hawaiian language is made up of words which have been built from short root words. A translation of the roots will usually give the original meaning of a word. Presto! I would find the words used by the kahunas in recorded chants and prayers and make a fresh translation of them from the roots. On the following morning, I recall the fact that everyone agreed in Hawaii that the kahunas had taught that man had two spirits or souls. No one paid the slightest attention to this patently erroneous belief. How could a man have two souls? What absurdity! What dark superstition! So I hunted up the two words naming the two souls. As I suspected, they were both there in my copy of the old dictionary, which had come off the presses in 1865. Some years after the discovery of mesmerism, during the early days of psychical research, and a full 2 decades before the birth of our infant science of psychology. The dictionary said, Unihipili, the leg and arm bones of a person. Unihipili was the name of one class of gods called Aquanoho. Aumakua was another. They were the departed spirits of deceased persons. Uhane, the soul, the spirit of a person, the ghost or spirit of a deceased person. Note, the Hawaiians supposed that men had two souls each, That one died with the body, the other lived on, either visible or invisible as might be, but had no more connection with the person deceased than his shadow. These ghosts could talk, cry, complain, etc. They were those supposed to be skillful in entrapping or catching them. It was apparent that the earnest missionaries had consulted the Hawaiians to ascertain the meanings of these two words, and had been given conflicting information which they had done their best to order and include in the translations. The outstanding feature of the unihipili was that it seemed to be connected with the arms and legs very definitely, and besides that, it was a spirit. The uhane was also a spirit, but it was a ghost who could talk even if it were hardly more than a shadow in connection with the person of the deceased. As the first word was longer and had the most roots, I began work on it to get a root translation. There were 7 roots in the word, counting overlaps of letters, and some of these roots had as many as 10 meanings. My task was to sort meanings to see if I could find any that would apply to the magic used by the kahunas. Here was my haystack before me, and all I needed to find was the needle. It seemed rather promising. I remembered Dr. Brigham's injunction to watch always for the consciousness involved in fire walking and other magic, for the force used to produce the magical result, and for the visible or invisible physical substance through which the force might act. Yes, I would try to find 3 needles, and I did find them eventually, the first 2 before the year was out, and the last one 6 years later. What I found immediately and almost before lunchtime was the subconscious, but not as we know it. The subconscious of the magicians was twice as large and 3 times as natural. I was so surprised by the discovery that I went down for the full count of 10. It was incredible that the kahunas could have known the subconscious, but the evidence was undeniable. Here is how the roots describe the spirits named in the words unihipili and uhane. Both are spirits, root u. And this root means to grieve, so both spirits were able to grieve. But the root hane in uhane means to talk, so the spirit named in this word could talk. As only human beings talk, this spirit must be a human one. That raises the question as to the nature of the other spirit. It can grieve, and so can animals. It may not be a man who can talk, but at least it is an animal-like spirit that can grieve. The uhane cried and talked weakly. In the dictionary note, it was said to be considered nothing more than a shadow connected with a deceased person. Evidently, it was a weak and not very substantial talking spirit. Unihipili, with an alternate spelling of unhinipili, gives more roots to translate. Combined, we get a spirit which can grieve but may not be able to talk. It is something that covers up something else and hides it, or itself hidden as by a cover or veil. Uhi. It is a spirit which accompanies another, is joined to it, is sticky, and sticks or adheres to it. It attaches itself to another and acts as its servant. Pili. It is a spirit which does things secretly, silently, and very carefully, but does not do certain things because it is afraid of offending the gods. Nihi. It is a spirit that can protrude from something, can rise up from that something, and which can also draw something out of something, as a coin from a pocket. It desires certain things most earnestly. It is stubborn and unwilling, disposed to refuse to do as told. It tinctures or impregnates or mixes completely with something else. It is connected with the slow dripping of water, or with the manufacture and exudation of nourishing water, as the breast water or milk of the mother. In its several meanings. Note: later on, I was to learn that water is the symbol of the human electrovital force, so there was one needle. The 2 conscious spirits of man are 2/3 of the other needle, but the third is only hinted at in the meaning of the sticky or to adhere. To summarize, the kahuna idea of the conscious and subconscious seems to be, judging from the root meanings of the names given, a pair of spirits closely joined in a body which is controlled by the subconscious and used to cover and hide them both. The conscious spirit is more human and possesses the ability to talk. The grieving subconscious weeps tears, dribbles water, and otherwise handles the vital force of the body. It does its work with secrecy and silent care, but it is stubborn and disposed to refuse to obey. It refuses to do things when it fears the gods, holds a complex or fixation of ideas, and it intermingles or tinctures the conscious spirit to give the impression of being one with it. The use made in magic of the sticky element as a symbol, and the ability to protrude or to draw something out of something else will become clear later. Given this certainty that the kahunas had known for thousands of years all the psychology we had come to know in the last few years, I became quite sure that their ability to perform feats of magic stemmed from their knowledge of important psychological factors not yet discovered by us. It soon became apparent that, in naming the elements of psychology and placing in their words root symbol meanings to point to related elements, the kahunas of the dawn days had done a superb job. The only great stumbling block was the fact that the symbol words stood for elements whose nature I could not imagine. Searching feverishly for the meanings of these symbols, I returned to the reports in psychic phenomena, and as I checked each type of phenomenon in turn, endeavored to locate its counterpart symbol and the roots of the terms used by the kahunas. After a few months, it became plain that I had gone as far as I could in the first work of matching the more complete psychology with the external rites of kahuna magic. I decided that what I had found was too valuable to keep from the world, and forthwith wrote a report on my findings and the kahuna lore in general. The English publication brought me many letters. I had placed my name and address in the back of the report and had requested any reader who could offer pertinent information for the study to write to me. Almost no really helpful information arrived, although hundreds of letters contained speculative material and guesses. Then, over a year after the publication of that book, there came a letter from a retired English journalist. His name was William Reginald Stewart, and what he had to say was very much to the point. In my report, he had been greatly interested to find that I was describing the same magic that he, in his younger days, had found being used by a certain Berber tribe in the Atlas Mountains of North Africa. Also, to his surprise, he had found that the Hawaiian words used by the kahunas were the same, except for dialect differences, as those which had been used to describe the magic in Africa. Yet after reading my book, hunted up his yellowed notes and compared words which he had been told belonged to a secret magical language. The Hawaiian word kahuna appeared as kwahuna among the Berbers, and the Hawaiian term for woman kahuna was changed from kahuna wahine to kwahine. The word for a god was nearly the same in both languages, akua and atua, as were a number of other words we checked. As the Berber tribe spoke a language not at all related to the Polynesian dialects, the discovery of the similarity of the magic and the language used to describe it offered definite proof that the two peoples had either come from the same original stock or had been in contact with each other in ancient times. Stewart had heard tales of this Berber tribe and their magician while exploring for oil signs for a Dutch company and corresponding for the Christian Science Monitor as a freelance writer and authority on North Africa. Taking a vacation, he hired guides and set out to find the tribe. Eventually, he did find it and met the magician, a woman. By dint of much persuasion, he got himself adopted and made her blood son so that he could become eligible to receive training in the secret magic. The magician, whose name was Luki, had a daughter aged 17 who was just beginning to take the training, so Stewart was allowed to join in. The training began with her explanations of legendary tribal history, in which it was related that 12 tribes of the people having kahunas once lived in the Sahara Desert when it was still a green and fertile land of flowing rivers. The rivers dried up and the tribes moved into the valley of the Nile. While there they used their magic to help cut, carry, and place the building stones of the Great Pyramid. At that time they were rulers in Egypt and topped all others because of their magic. The account continued with the recital of how it was foreseen that a time of intellectual darkness was due in the world, and that the secret of their magic was in danger of being lost. To preserve it, for it was as precious as it was secret, the 12 tribes decided to hunt for isolated lands to which they might go to preserve the secret, Huna, until the time was ripe for its return to the world. 11 of the tribes, after making a psychic exploration of finding the islands of the Pacific empty and waiting, moved off by way of a canal to the Red Sea, and thence along either the African coast or over to India and thence into the Pacific. After many years they became lost, insofar as the 12th tribe was concerned. This 12th tribe had, for some unstated reason, decided to go north and settle in the Atlas Mountain fastnesses. They had lived there for centuries, always preserving the secret and using its magic, but as modern times arrived, the kahunas had died out until only one remained. She was the teacher, Luchi. Stewart found the Berber tribe hospitable, clean, very intelligent, and in possession of a fine old culture. They spoke a conglomerate language peculiar to the Berber tribes, but when it came to teaching the ancient lore of magic, another language had to be employed because in it alone could be found the proper words to name the elements in man which made magic possible. The young Englishman was already hampered by language difficulties, having to match his French with that of some of the Berbers, and having to delve endlessly to arrive at a proper understanding of what words in the so-called secret language might mean. Little by little, he learned the basic philosophy of magic. His teacher made many demonstrations of her magic in healing and in the control of birds, bees, serpents, and weather. All was going well indeed. And the theoretical work had been covered and its practical application was about to follow. Then, on a misty afternoon, 2 raiding parties in the valley below the Berber camp began shooting at each other. A stray bullet struck Luchi over the heart, and she died almost instantly. Left without a teacher and with Luki's daughter knowing no more than he did, Stewart's training came to an abrupt end. He gathered up his notes, took leave of his blood brothers and sisters, and returned his old rounds. It was 30 years later that he read my report and recognized the Hawaiian words I mentioned as the same words, aside from the dialect changes which he had preserved so long in his notes. This linked up the Hawaiian kahunas with North Africa and possibly with Egypt. Hawaiian legends contained the oral history of the people, and these, it is told, that the Hawaiians once lived in a homeland far away. They saw by psychic sight the land of Hawaii and set out to find it. Their journey commenced at the Red Sea of Cain, which fits neatly into the idea that they came from Egypt by way of the Red Sea, as it is called to this day in at least 3 languages. The history gives few details of the journey from that place on, except to tell how progress was made from land to land in large double canoes. When the 8 unoccupied islands of Hawaii were found by the scouts who went ahead, they returned to the nearest islands to the west to fetch the others of the tribe who had remained there to rest. Trees, plants, and animals were brought up on subsequent voyages as the tribe moved in and took up its home in Hawaii. The voyages to the outside islands stopped for a long time and complete isolation reigned. When the royal blood ran out and a voyage to the other islands was made to find and bring back a prince of the high blood, he brought with him his favorites and a kahuna. This kahuna, if we can credit the account, introduced into Hawaii a contaminated form of kahunaism, which contained little magic and commanded idol worship and temple building. This contamination remained with its idols and temples, even though kahunas possessing knowledge of the workable and practical magic continued their work and preserved the secret in almost uncontaminated form. Attempts by scholars to trace Hawaiian origins through language and customs have been none too successful. There are 11 tribes of Polynesians, all speaking dialects of the same language, but some having words, customs, and beliefs easily identified as of Indian origin. On the other hand, Polynesian words may be found scattered all the way from the Pacific to the Near East. Madagascar has them, indicating the early contact with a people who spoke the Polynesian language. Even in Japan may be found Polynesian words and ideas. In India, a number of the ideas connected with the kahuna magic are to be seen greatly changed and now of no practical use, but still pointing in the same general direction. With the invaluable help of Stuart, and by making full use of what he had learned in North Africa, I was able to continue the research. Little by little, the secret was reconstructed as its symbols and practices were matched against the observations made of the external acts or rites of the kahunas by Dr. Brigham and, in a lesser degree, by me. It would, however, have been utterly impossible to grasp the meanings of the words and the significance of rites had modern psychology and psychical research not already made certain basic discoveries upon which so rest fuller structures. Religions also played a valuable part because in them I found the battered remains of the original Huna philosophy. These remains, misshapen as they were, gave hints as to where to look next for certain bits of information, and helped to verify other uncertain materials as they came to light. Soon after the publication of my report in England, I had entered into a correspondence with a priest of the Church of England, who had written me upon reading my book, and who was carrying on psychological studies of mental and spiritual healing. His interest in the kahuna lore grew, and shortly after my contact with Stuart, the clergyman and a group of his associates decided to try out some of the healing magic of the kahunas. This they did, after much writing back and forth. They were especially successful in obsessional cases. The family of a patient who was healed offered to supply money for extensive experimental work, and the clergyman and 3 of his group made the journey to California to spend some time with me in discussing the best ways to proceed. They left me, all plans complete, even to a blueprint of the building to be erected. But on their way back to England, World War II broke out, and the plans were dropped. With the war over, the funds are no longer available, and the healing group is scattered. Such experimental work as has been done has gone far to prove that the reconstruction of the Huna system is sufficiently complete to be workable in the hands of individuals owning certain natural talents and able to give sufficient time to learning the use of the system. Steady and continued practice under proper guidance seems to be the main thing needed. In Hawaii, there is little or no dependable literature covering the kahunas. What little there is available in books and articles and pamphlets misses entirely the basic mechanisms of which I report. Each writer contradicts the others, and the muddle is never resolved. My own studies and those of Dr. Brigham are almost unknown in the islands, and copies of my first report are kept carefully locked away in the library in Honolulu, being brought out only if requested by one who knows that it is there. Because of misconceptions and because there was formerly a very real danger in the death prayer, the general attitude of the residents is one which encourages denial of kahuna magic, or failing that, a policy of letting sleeping dogs lie. With these introductory remarks, I will now proceed with the task of presenting the Huna system with all its details and with the available proofs of its correctness as a workable set of scientific facts. The Secret Behind Miracles by Max Freedom Long, Chapter 2, Fire Walking as an Introduction to Magic. There are 2 features that make the psycho-religious system of the secret Huna outstanding and set it apart from the modern systems of either religion or psychology. First and foremost, it works. It worked for the kahunas, and it should work for us. Second, and but slightly less significant, it works for men no matter what their religious beliefs. The finest example of a workable piece of magic which functions perfectly in the hands of any and all religionists or in the hands of heathens and savages, is firewalking, which has been practiced for centuries and which continues to be practiced today in many parts of the world. Firewalking has another thing to recommend it. It involves feet and burning coals or other burning hot materials such as stone or even pure flame. Now, there is nothing mysterious about feet or hot things. Both are subject to the most painstaking examination, and neither is subject to the manipulations of trickery. In addition to feet and heat, there's a third element which cannot be seen, tested, or examined. But it is just as real and just as free from danger of trickery. This third element is what I call magic, for want of a better word. This third element is certainly present when feet contact heat, and burns do not result in the usual way. War has been waged steadily on superstitions for at least 2 centuries. The growth of the sciences was dependent on the ability of scientists to fight up through superstitions and religious dogmatic taboos. Today, however, scientific denial of psychic and psychological phenomena has turned out to be a dogmatic taboo of science itself. Our schools and our press have done their best for years to discredit all things which could not be explained, setting up the cry of black superstition. Because of this attitude, the average person has been led to believe that all magic, and especially such things as firewalking, are the beginning and end of trickery. If my report is to get a hearing, I must prove that magic is a fact. I shall prove that it is. But for the reader who has already decided that no such proof can be given to his personal satisfaction, I say this: read my report anyway. It offers much new and exciting material for thought, and will be found entertaining if nothing else. And when you finish it, see if you can give a better set of answers to its puzzling questions than did the kahunas. For convenience sake, in my report, I shall place major units of evidential material under case headings, with preliminary notes of introduction and with a comment at the end. For the first case, I draw from Dr. Brigham's investigations and personal observations in the field. Case 1. Dr. Brigham firewalks on red-hot lava. Preliminary notes. The usual explanation for firewalking is that the feet are so calloused that they cannot be burned, or that they have been toughened by alum or other chemicals. Also, the coals or hot rocks are said to be covered with a layer of ashes, or not to be hot enough to burn. Harry Price, in trying to explain the firewalking of Kurabu, a Kashmiri Mohammedan, before the University of London Council for Physical Investigations in 1936, wrote, "It is hardly necessary to point out that in rapid walking, the whole of the foot is not put into contact with or withdrawn from the ground at one instant, so that no portion of the skin was in contact with the hot embers for as long as half a second. In the case about to be presented, it will be noted that none of these explanations is adequate. I give the account as I recorded it in my notes shortly after getting it at first hand from Dr. Brigham. To make it more visual, I have tried to reproduce his own words and expressions." The case. "When the flow started," related Dr. Brigham, "I was in South Kona at Napupu. I waited a few days to see whether it promised to be a long one. When it continued steadily, I sent a message to my 3 kahuna friends who had promised to let me do some firewalking under their protection, asking them to meet me at Napupu so we could go to the flow and try firewalking. It was a week before they arrived, as they had to come around from Kau by canoe, and even when they came, they couldn't start at once. To them it was our reunion that counted, and not so simple a matter as a bit of firewalking. Nothing would do but that we get a pig and have a luau, native feast. It was a great luau. Half of Kona invited itself. When it was over, I had to wait another day until one of the kahunas sobered up enough to travel. It was night when we finally got off, after having to wait an entire afternoon to get rid of those who had heard what was up and wished to go along. I'd have taken them all had it not been that I was not too sure I would walk the hot lava when the time came. I had seen these 3 kahunas run barefooted over little overflows of lava at Kilauea, and the memory of that heat wasn't any too encouraging. The going was hard that night as we climbed the gentle slope and worked our way across old lava flows toward the upper rainforest. The kahunas had on sandals, but the sharp cindery particles on some of the old flows got next their feet. We were always having to wait while one or another sat down and removed the adhesive cinders. When we got up among the trees and ferns, it was dark as pitch. We fell over the roots and into holes. We gave it up after a time and bedded down in an old lava tube for the rest of the night. In the morning, we ate some of our poi and dried fish, then set out to find more water. This took us some time, as there are no springs or streams in those parts, and we had to watch for puddles of rain water gathered in hollow places in the rocks. Until we climbed upward under a smoky sky and with the smell of sulfur fumes growing stronger and stronger. Then came more poi and fish. At about 3 o'clock, we arrived at the source of the flow. It was a grand sight. The side of the mountain had broken open just above the timberlines, and the lava was spouting out of several vents, shooting with a roar as high as 200 feet and falling to make a great bubbling pool. The pool drained off at the lower end into a flow. An hour before sunset, we started following it down to search of a place where we could try our experiment. As usual, the flow had followed the ridges instead of the valleys and had built up itself enclosing walls of clinker. These walls were up to 1,000 yards in width, and the hot lava ran between them in a channel that had cut to bedrock. We climbed up these walls several times and crossed them to have a look at the flow. The clinkery surface was cool enough by then for us to walk on it, but here and there we could look down into cracks and see the red glow below. Now and again, we had to dodge places where colorless flames were sprouting up like gas jets in the red light filtering through the smoke. Coming down to the rainforest without finding a place where the flow blocked up and overflowed periodically, we bedded down again for the night. In the morning, we went on, and in a few hours found what we wanted. The flow crossed a more level strip, perhaps half a mile wide. Here the enclosing walls ran in flat terraces with sharp drops from one level to the next. Now and again a floating boulder or mass of clinker would plug the flow just where a drop commenced, and then the lava would back up and spread out in a large pool. Soon the plug would be forced out and the lava would drain away, leaving behind a fine flat surface to walk on when sufficiently hardened. Stopping beside the largest of 3 overflows, we watched it fill and empty. The heat was intense, of course, even up on the clinkery wall. Down below us the lava was red and flowing like water, the only difference being that water wouldn't get that hot and that the lava never made a sound even when going 20 miles an hour down a sharp grade. That silence always interested me when I see a flow. Where water has to run over rocky bottoms and rough projections, lava burns off everything and makes itself a channel as smooth as the inside of a crock. As we wanted to get back down to the coast that day, the kahunas wasted no time. They had brought tea leaves with them and were all ready for action as soon as the lava would bear our weight. The leaves of the tea plant, Ti, are universally used by firewalkers where available in Polynesia. They are a foot or 2 long and fairly narrow, with cutting edge like sawgrass. They grow in a tuft on top of the stalk, resembling in size and shape of a broomstick. When the rocks we threw on the lava surface showed that it had hardened enough to bear our weight, the kahunas arose and clambered down the side of the wall. It was far worse than a bake oven when we got to the bottom. The lava was blackening on the surface, but all across it ran heat discolorations that came and went as they do on cooling iron before a blacksmith plunges it into his tub for tempering. I heartily wished that I had not been so curious. The very thought of running over the flat inferno to the other side made me tremble, and remember that I had seen all 3 of the kahunas scamper over hot lava at Kilauea. The kahunas took off their sandals and tied tea leaves round their feet, about 3 leaves to the foot. I sat down and began tying my tea leaves on outside my big hobnailed boots. I wasn't taking any chances, but that wouldn't do at all. I must take off my boots and my 2 pairs of socks. The goddess Pele hadn't agreed to keep boots from burning, and it might be an insult to her if I wore them. I argued hotly, and I say hotly because we were all but roasted. I knew that Pele wasn't the one who made fire magic possible, and I did my best to find out what or who was. As usual, they grinned and said that, of course, the white kahuna knew the trick of getting mana, power of some kind known to kahunas, out of air and water to use it in kahuna work, and that we were wasting time talking about the thing no kahuna ever put into words, the secret handed down only from father to son. The upshot of the matter was that I sat tight and refused to take off my boots. In the back of my mind, I figured that if the Hawaiians could walk over hot lava with bare cow's feet, I could do it with my heavy leather soles to protect me. Remember that this happened at a time when I still had an idea that there was some physical explanation for the thing. The kahunas got to considering my boots a great joke. If I wanted to offer them as a sacrifice to the gods, it might be a good idea. They grinned at each other and left me to tie my leaves while they began their chants. The chants were in an archaic Hawaiian which I could not follow. It was the usual god talk handed down word for countless generations. All I could make of it was that it consisted of simple little mentions of legendary history and was peppered with praise of some god or gods. I almost roasted alive before the kahunas had finished their chanting, although it could not have taken more than a few minutes. Suddenly, the time was at hand. One of the kahunas beat at the shimmering surface of the lava with a bunch of tea leaves and then offered me the honor of crossing first. I instantly remembered my manners. I was all for age before beauty. The matter was settled at once by deciding that the oldest kahuna should go first, I second, and the others side by side. Without a moment of hesitation, the oldest man trotted out on that terrifically hot surface. I was watching him with my mouth open, and he was nearly across, a distance of about 150 feet, when someone gave me a shove that resulted in my having a choice of falling on my face on the lava or catching a running stride. I still do not know what madness seized me, but I ran. That heat was unbelievable. I held my breath and my mind seemed to stop functioning. I was young then and could do my 100-yard dash with the best. Did I run? I flew. I would have broken all records, but with my first few steps, the soles of my boots began to burn. They curled and shrank, clamping down on my feet like a vice. The seams gave away, and I found myself with one sole gone and the other flapping behind me from the leather strap of the heel. That flapping sole was almost the death of me. It tripped me repeatedly and slowed me down. Finally, after what seemed minutes but could not have been more than a few seconds, I leaped off to safety. I looked down at my feet and found my socks burning at the edges of the curled leather uppers of my boots. I beat out the smoldering fire in the cotton fabric and looked up to find my 3 kahunas rocking with laughter as they pointed to the heel and sole of my left boot, which lay smoking and burned to a crisp on the lava. I laughed too. I was never so relieved in my life as I was to find that I was safe and that there was not a blister on my feet, not even where I had beaten out the fire in the socks. There is little more than I can tell of this experience. I had a sensation of intense heat on my face and body, but almost no sensation in my feet. When I touched them with my hands, they were hot on the bottoms, but they did not feel so except to my hands. None of the kahunas had a blister, although the tea leaves which they had tied on their feet had burned away long since. My return trip to the coast was a nightmare. Trying to make it in improvised sandals whittled from green wood has left me with an impression almost more vivid than my firewalking. Comment. There you have Dr. Brigham's story. You will now doubtless be interested to know how this scientist tried to figure out the reason for his being able to do what he had done. It's magic, he assured me. It's a part of the bulk of magic done by the kahunas and by other primitive peoples. It took me years to come to that understanding, but it is my final decision after long study and observation. But, I asked, didn't you try to explain it some other way? The doctor smiled at me. Certainly I did. It has been no easy task for me to come to believe magic possible. And even after I was dead sure it was magic, I still had a deep-seated doubt concerning my own conclusions. Even after doing the fire walking, I came back to the theory that lava might form a porous and insulating surface as it cooled. Twice I tested that theory at Kilauea when there were little overflows. I waited in one case until a small overflow had cooled quite black, then touched it with the tips of my fingers. But although the lava was much cooler than that I ran across, I burned my fingers badly, and I'd only just dabbed at the hot surface. "And the other time?" I asked. He shook his head and smiled guiltily. I should have known better after that first set of blisters, but the old ideas were hard to down. I knew I had walked over hot lava, but still I couldn't always believe it possible that I could have done so. The second time I got excited about my insulating surface theory. I took up some hot lava on a stick as one would take up taffy, and I had to burn a finger again before I was satisfied. No, there is no mistake. The kahunas use magic in their fire walking as well as in many other things. There is one set of natural laws for the physical world and another for the other world. And try to believe this if you can. The laws of the other side are much stronger, that they can be used to neutralize and reverse the laws of the physical. In this case, we have an instance in which the magical control of heat was of such a nature that it did not protect the leather in Dr. Bergham's heavy boots, but did protect his feet. There was no chemical solution to protect the feet of the firewalkers from heat. There was no layer of ashes on the lava to insulate it. The lava was so hot that even running steps, where contact was momentarily between boots and lava, the leather burned to a crisp. The heat was far more than enough to burn feet under any ordinary circumstances. Case 2. A stage magician who used genuine magic. Preliminary notes. Startling as it may seem, there is real magic sometimes used on stage instead of the supposed mechanical trickery which we universally believe to be in use. In this case, we have a man traveling with a carnival and saying nothing about the magic he uses, unless it to be to those inclined and able to accept a statement of the true facts. This man and his wife performed in Honolulu and later were kind enough to try to explain their magic to me and to try to tell how they had learned it. Just now we are interested only in what they did and not how they did it. The so-called fire magic usually seen on the stage or in circus and carnival is a very poor imitation of what I shall next describe. It consists mainly of such feats as holding a lighted cigarette on the tongue and inserting it into the mouth, with the coal beheld safely away from the contact with the flesh, or of taking gasoline into the mouth and lighting its vapors as they're blown out, this being possible because the vapors burn only when well away from the lips and after mixing with air. The case. The fire magician of whom I speak gave his performance in a small tent. A railing separated him from his audience by a distance of from 3 to 6 feet. His apparatus consisted of a pine table on which lay the few things he used. The only part of his performance in which real magic was not used was the part in which his little dog leaped delightedly through a small hoop soaked with oil and set afire. Everything was done at close range, and the watchers encouraged to test the heat of every article before it was brought into contact with flesh. Every move was made slowly and with no attempt to juggle or conceal. The following things were done by the magician in each of the 2 performances which I witnessed. 1. He boiled water in a cup and drank it down rapidly while it was still bubbling and steaming. 2. Finger-thick pieces of soft pine wood were held in the blaze of a gas burner until they were turned at one end to glowing charcoal. He took up 6 of these, bit off the live ends, and chewed them. 3. He heated thick iron bars to a bright red heat in the middle and then passed his tongue along the red surface repeatedly, resulting in sizzling steam rising from his bare tongue. 4. He lighted an ordinary welding torch, drew the flame down to a cutting cone of blue-green, used the flame to cut through iron bars repeatedly, gave the bars and the torch to members of the audience for examination. without adjusting the torch in any way, and seeming to have no protection or method of temporarily extinguishing the flame, he introduced it repeatedly into his mouth. His mouth remained open to its fullest extent, and the flame could be seen playing from the end of the burner, even when it had been thrust in as far as his lips. 5. He heated an iron bar to redness and handled it with bare hands, in a way which would have burned another severely indeed. He took a heavier flat bar and heated it to redness in the center. He took the heated part between his teeth, and holding the ends of the bar in his hands, bent it up and down twice from the center. Comment. The bending of the bar held between the performer's teeth caused me to examine his teeth carefully. They were strong teeth and not false. This point interested me greatly, as the red-hot iron remained for a period of nearly 10 seconds in close contact with the upper and lower front teeth. Although this was one of his stock tricks, done several times in an evening, the enamel was not cracked on the teeth, nor did they seem injured. Before the second performance, a dentist joined me. He stated that contact with such would kill nerves and destroy teeth under ordinary circumstances, as well as cause intolerable pain while the nerves were still alive. Ulceration would result and the teeth have to be pulled out. We scraped the biting edges of the teeth with a penknife just before the second performance, this to make sure no visible insulating substance, no matter how thin and transparent, could be present. The question of some solution to insulate from heat seemed most improbable, as the mouth was itself wet, although the edges of the teeth would hardly take such a coating, one too thin to be detected or scraped off. Case 3. A professor of biblical history reports. Preliminary notes. On February 21, 1935, I attended a lecture at the Los Angeles Public Library. The speaker was Dr. John G. Hill, professor of biblical history at the University of Southern California. His subject was fire walking. He had spent 4 seasons in South Seas and illustrated his lecture with moving pictures he had taken. He told of voyaging from Tahiti to a neighboring island and of traveling 14 miles overland to see fire walking performance. A great pit had been dug, filled with logs and stones, and a fire had been burning among them for many hours until the stones were red hot. Invocations were recited to Nahine, woman of the skies. Then the performers marched around the pit and made 7 crossings back and forth. Tea leaves were used in the ceremony to carry and to dust off the rocks. Dr. Hill exposed much film, taking close-up pictures of the feet and hot rocks and pictures of the group walking in single file over the stones. He showed one native who had been forced to walk the hot stones as an ordeal to prove his guilt or innocence at a certain charge. As he was badly burned, the natives decided that he was guilty, despite his denials, and so had not permitted the protection of Nahine of the skies. The ceremony over Dr. Hill and his white companions tested the heat of the rocks. The following results being reported. Length of time possible to hold the hand at a distance of 3 feet from the rocks, 11 seconds. Time required for a bundle of wet, green branches to take fire when thrown on the rocks, 13 minutes. While the testing of the heat was going on, the head magician was inviting his guests to cross the rocks under the protection of his magic. One of the white men joined the natives who were accepting the invitation. He walked across the rocks. Dr. Hill stated that they were almost red hot even at that time. The man's shoes were not burned in any way, nor were his feet, but oddly enough, the intense heat burned his face so badly that it peeled a few days later. After the lecture, I joined a group gathered to hear Dr. Hill answer questions. He was asked for any possible explanation of the feat. His answer was that he was totally at a loss for an explanation. He could only guess that there might be some superior form of mental activity used, some form which could keep heat from burning. He was very positive in his refusal to accept his own guess as fact. The usual questions were raised as to the possibility of some undetectable solution being used. This, the doctor explained, was impossible for the simple reason that the white man's shoes had not been so treated and would certainly have been ruined by the heat under ordinary circumstances. In an endeavor to throw further light on the mystery, Dr. Hill told of another fire-walking performance which he had seen but not photographed. There was a young white man described as being quite a mystic, about that if the brown man's magic would protect them, his God would also protect him. He questioned the friendly magician in charge and was laughingly told to go on across stones without fear. Disregarding the protests of other white travelers, the young man took off shoes and socks. He approached the fire walk with set face, evidently trying to concentrate on his task and hold his faith in readiness. He followed the magician onto the rocks and was getting on perfectly when a wild dogfight broke out close beside the pit. For a moment he glanced aside. He lifted one foot suddenly, but his face again became set and he continued his crossing. The foot lifted was found later to have a large blister on its sole. Dr. Hill vouched for his data, but made no comment on its possible significance. Comment. For those who may not have seen moving pictures of firewalking shown in 1934, new reels at theaters, I mentioned the following sources of photographic or written information. The book, The Colony of Fiji, edited by A. Wright and published by the government of Fiji, contains several good illustrations of firewalking. As a commentary on the influence of the scientific attitude insofar as any official publication is concerned, we find in this book only one lone paragraph to describe the finest tourist attraction in Fiji. This paragraph gives a meager statement of the facts of firewalking, but nothing more. Another book more easily procured in libraries is The Sea Tracks of the Speedjacks. In its log, which is written by Gene Cohen, will be found both pictures and full descriptions of the fire magicians and their work. In Herbert Macquarie's book, The Tahiti Days, George H. Doran, 1920, an entire chapter is given over to a report on firewalking, and there are 5 pictures showing the firewalkers, crowds, and pit, as well as the actual performance. Case 4. Firewalking as a religious rite in Burma. Preliminary notes. In Hawaii, I made my living for the greater part of my stay in the islands by keeping a Kodak and art store in Honolulu. Among my many customers, there was, in the year 1929, an Englishman who had been making a trip around the world. He carried with him a 16mm moving picture camera and was especially anxious to photograph anything out of the ordinary. I had known him several days when he came in one morning and asked me if there was anything in Hawaii which was very unusual and which he might film. I certainly knew of many very unusual things in Hawaii, but it was impossible to tell him where he might go to get a picture of a kahuna at work with his magic. In the course of our conversation, he mentioned the fact that he had bribed the priests of a certain temple in Burma to let him hide on a temple balcony and photograph the mysterious and far-famed firewalking of the devotees of the fire god Agni. I begged for the story and the opportunity to see his pictures. He went at once to his hotel and brought back the films. Let me give in detail what I saw and what was told that day in my little projection room. The case. You see, said my friend, with all the glow of one about to present a wonder of wonders, I don't just tell about the things I see, I photograph them, and it's a good thing I do. Now take this film I'm about to show you. If I didn't have the film, I'd even think I hadn't seen it myself. What I saw is impossible. It's contrary to nature. Anyone will tell you it couldn't happen. I'll even tell you that, and I saw it with my own eyes not 3 months ago. He paused and waited for me to look up from threading the projector. I did my best to show the proper surprise and mystification. Well, he said grandly, turn it on, see if you can believe what the camera got. I pulled out a couple of chairs and threw in the switch. On the screen at the end of the projection room, lifelike shadows began to flicker and move. That, explained my friend, is the parade. It came before the service in the temple's courtyard. That bunch going past now are the candidates who had been getting ready for years to take the fire initiation at the Agni cult. Odd beggars, those brown people. See the funny looks on their faces? They all seemed to be thinking hard about something as they marched along. Never seemed to notice the crowd which had gone crazy with excitement just to see them. Seems everyone hopes some day to get ready to walk through the fire. Great honor. Walk through once and you are set for life. You become some sort of priest or holy man. All the priests in the temple have had to walk through fire to get their jobs." "How do they do it?" I asked, as I watched the long parade move past with all its oriental trappings. "Wouldn't you jolly well like to know? And wouldn't I?" "What do you think?" I urged. "How should I know? I tried to get it out of the priests, but they've spoofed me, I think. They said theirs was the one and only true religion, and that the fire walking proved it. Said no other faith could make it possible for the converts to walk through fire. What they wanted me to believe was that their God kept the feet of the pure and holy from being burned. Those who weren't quite pure enough got burned." He pointed suddenly to the screen. "See that chap? He's the priest I managed to get off to one side to talk to, at about the time the parade was done marching all over the city. Good sort, really rather sporting. He was smart, too." "How do you mean?" I asked. "Not like most of the other beggars, suspicious and hating white skins. And by smart, I mean he was smart enough to pretend to believe me when I told him I studied his religion and wanted to join up. I thought he was going to laugh in my face at first, but I jingled money in my pocket and he began to take me seriously." "Perhaps he did take you seriously," I suggested as I watched the parade continue to pass on the screen. "He was no fool, not that one. He'd heard money. And when I told him I would join up and pay well if I could be allowed to see the fire walking with my own eyes, he got my drift. I insisted on giving him a good donation for his church right there. He thanked me for it and told me to meet him in a little while at a side door of the temple. Of course, I didn't say anything about bringing along my little movie camera." The scene changed suddenly on the screen and the inner courtyard of the temple appeared. It was a large court surrounded by high walls. Below us and at one end was a long, high pile of burning charcoal which shimmered with intense heat. It was perhaps 50 feet long and about 5 feet high. Men were beginning to rake it out into a long, narrow platform of living coals as I watched. "That's it," cried my English friend. "I met my priest and got in with my camera case without his knowing what I was up to. He took me up to a balcony and hid me behind some bamboo screens. I paid some more church dues and he went off. In a minute, I had a hole in the screen for the lens and one for the finder, so I had at it right away. I took the beginning and the end of the raking out of the coals." He continued as the scene changed. "See, now they are all done and are smoothing down the bed, about 6 inches deep. The charcoal had been burning for 10 hours, the priest told me. Hot as Hades, made it so hot, even off there behind the bamboo screen, that I could hardly stand it. And see how the rakers have to keep their heads turned away and have to keep turning their bodies from side to side so they won't roast? Beastly hot. And now watch that gate in this scene. I began filming when I heard the noise outside. I knew the procession was about to come in. There they are, priests in front and the candidates next. All men candidates. Women are too sinful ever to get purified. Lots of the men are old. 43 I counted. And see their faces? Look like they were going to afternoon tea. Got on their most polite faces. Those big fellows in uniform are sick bobbies. Find them in all British possessions. They don't belong to the temple, but the authorities send them along to keep order. You'll see them keeping it right soon." As I watched, the procession moved into the courtyard. The candidates gathered in a silent group at one end of the long bed of shimmering coals. Behind them gathered a mixed crowd of men, women, and children, all greatly excited. The 6 moved slowly through the crowd, their clubs in hand. The priests had gone around the fire and met another group of 6 priests who had come from the temple and were taking their places at the opposite end of the bed of coals. In the hands of each of the 6 was a short whip with many lashes. Between them and the fire was a shallow, water-filled indentation in the paving. It was about 6 feet wide, 4 inches deep, and 10 feet long, extending all across the end of the glowing platform. "What are the whips for?" I asked. "Are they to keep the firewalkers out of the water?" "You'll see in a moment," was the hurried answer. "Seems that when they step out of the fire into the water, the priests have to beat them to keep their minds off their hot feet for a second." I asked the priest, but didn't understand what he tried to tell me, something about an old custom. "Do neither the whips nor the fire burn them?" I demanded. "The whips do. Lay their backs open sometimes. But keep your eyes on the picture, you see? They're all praying now, making a lot of funny gibberish, praying to Agni to protect the pure and burn the impure. Gave me the creeps. The camera moved back to the silent group of candidates. They were taking no part in the prayers, but simply waiting. They wore only loincloths. Then a bent old man raised his hand, as in greeting, to someone in the crowd behind. He turned and walked slowly to the pathway which danced and shimmered before him. Clasping his hands and lifting his face as if in appeal to heaven, he walked calmly into the bed of fire. I caught my breath. With a firm, steady stride, he went wading through the coals toward the priest, who waited at the far end. I scarcely breathed as I watched. His feet were leaving black tracks, which closed over and were lost in a moment after he had passed. On and on he went, never changing his pace, made slightly misty and unreal by the heat waves rising all about him. He seemed more an apparition than a man. As I stared, my amazement was tinged with doubt. What I was seeing was an impossibility. But the end of that dreadful pacing came at last. The old man stepped from the living fire into the water and was instantly taken by the arms on either side by two priests. Their cruel whips flashed 3 times, cutting into the bare brown back. The old man writhed with pain. 2 more priests took him and hurried him off to a bench beside the wall. They examined a foot each, nodded, and hurried back to their places. The camera flashed around and caught another candidate just as he stepped into the coals. He was a thin, middle-aged man. His face was turned to the waiting priest, and his hands were clenched and swinging at his sides. With long, rapid strides, he began his ordeal. His pace quickened. His head went up, and his face lifted as if away from the heat. He was halfway through and walking more and more rapidly. Suddenly, his pace broke, and he went on a rapid trot. The trot increased to a run, and as he came to the end of the fire bed, he leaped frantically for the water. Hardly had he leaped before the whips fell. They fell in flashing blows that doubled the candidate as he strained in the strong grasp of the 2 priests. The camera flashed back again to catch the next candidate. Was that second man burned? I faltered. No, only 3 got burned out of the whole bunch, was the abstract answer. Watch this one, he commanded. A very bent and feeble old man had entered the fire. His hands were stretched imploringly upward. After the first few steps, he began staggering. He hesitated, leaped into the air, plunged wildly forward, and fell. Instantly, attendants were at the side of the bed of coals, long drag hooks in their hands. They labored frantically, rolling the smoking body over and over. They dragged it clear, coals sticking to the burnt flesh. A jar of water was dashed over the still form, and it was lifted and carried swiftly away. Dead before they got him out, said a low voice at my elbow. I started slightly, having momentarily forgotten my friend. But that didn't stop them. They kept going right through. Again a splice ran through the projector, and the camera swung back from a man being lashed. It picked up another man at the far end. He had just stepped into the fire, and in his arms he carried a boy. The child was hardly more than 6 and dressed in loincloth only. I gasped in horror. Why should a child be endangered? What if the big lean man should fall? Again I held my breath. Would the man never start running? Was he insane? He'll make it, my friend encouraged me. I sank back into my chair. On and on the man went, striding deliberately. The little boy became vague and clear by turns, as the heat shimmer was stirred or left stagnant by air currents. One small hand lay quietly and confidently on the bare shoulder of the man. The boy gave no sign of fear or concern, never quickening or slackening his pace. The man came at last to the end. He stepped into the water. The whips fell, but once on his back. He lifted the boy high to keep him from being struck. In his gesture was something that hinted of a love great in its triumph. The camera followed as he set the child on his feet and led him away toward the wall. Suddenly the film began to change rapidly from scene to scene. Men ran or walked a few feet through the fire before vanishing. I was running short of film, explained the voice in my ear. I just took grab shots. But now watch. I got another of those who got burned. There he goes, off at the side, howling. Now he's into the water. No use to beat him. The priest said he'd never walk again. Now keep an eye on this. See that sick? See what happened? The crowd went crazy. Religious frenzy. They wanted to try it themselves. See those 6 with their clubs? What if they hadn't been there to lay them out? The whole crowd would have rushed into the fire. Suddenly the film clicked in the projector and the screen flickered blank and white. The picture was ended. "How do you feel?" asked the Englishman curiously. "Rather upset," I answered truthfully. "And wasn't I?" he exclaimed. "I'd seen it with my own eyes. For a penny, I'd have joined the temple. It gets you. I was a week trying to forget it. It's like seeing a ghost or something. Can't get your mind straightened out. You go giddy. Can't strike old balance. Keep wondering if you have everything wrong. Can't get over the idea that there's something in it besides a trick." "Then you really believe it's a trick?" I asked. There was a long moment of hesitation. "What else can it be?" "But how could the beggars put anything on their feet that wouldn't wear off in a half a day of parading barefoot? And how was it some of them got burned if they all had the same stuff on their feet to protect them?" "Perhaps they know better than we do what's behind it," I suggested. There was a slow nod. "I almost joined the temple just to find out if there was." Comment. In this case, it would seem that the priest did not use magic in behalf of the firewalkers, but let them use their own powers as best they might. It is evident that some were not yet good magicians, regardless of the religious significance of the matter. As we shall eventually consider a very important point concerning the nature of purification from sin in its relation to the ability to perform fire magic, I will now present a short case having to do with descendants of Igorot headhunters. Case 5. Descendants prove that their headhunting ancestors did firewalking safely. Preliminary notes. In the Philippines, the Igorots have done firewalking for centuries. They have also been headhunters. To waylay the enemy and take his head is not a business which the Burma devotees would consider a help to purification, but the Igorots seem unaware of this. Here we see descendants of the little pink-brown people using fire magic with the same success as did their forefathers. The case. Some Igorot firewalkers came to Los Angeles some years ago and gave several performances at the old Schutz Park on Washington Street. My friend, Mr. George Rumgold, saw them at work, and his description of their feats give us the usual picture of hot rocks, green branches in hands, and bare feet treading on intensely hot stones with no result burns. Comment. This case is mainly important to show that headhunters have done firewalking and that the art has come down to the Igorots of our time. Of secondary importance is the fact that magic can be practiced in civilized countries and away from the favorite plant, tea, which is also largely used in the ceremonial throughout Polynesia. Case 6. A Japanese healer uses fire magic. Preliminary notes. In the preceding cases, we have had the two best known forms of fire magic. For the third, we must look at a less widespread but more practical form, fire magic used in healing certain types of disease. The case. In 1928-1929, came to Honolulu a Japanese fire healer. He advertised his powers and began his healing practice. His specialty was the treatment of arthritis. He would heat stones so hot that they would ordinarily burn flesh. By the use of magic, according to his later admission in court, the stones could be packed around an affected joint and the trouble cured. There were several cases which he had treated successfully, notably the case of a wealthy American who had been unable to walk for several months because of arthritis in the knees. After treatment with the hot stones by the Japanese healer, he recovered the full use of his knees. Comment. This case is of importance to our study and proofs because the records of it are preserved in court documents. After practicing for some time in Honolulu, the Japanese was arrested at the instigation of the medical men. He was charged with practicing medicine without a license, but as he had administered no medicine, the charge pressed against him was that of being a kahuna. The court that tried him was not interested in evidence given to prove that his treatment was effective when that of local doctors was not. The Japanese offered as his defense the fact that he was using magic and not medicine. Magic is not admitted in evidence in any civilized court. He admitted that he had used burning hot stones to cure others. That was enough. He was fined and imprisoned as a kahuna. Later, he was deported. Had there been any trickery on the part of the Japanese healer, would it not seem that he would have acknowledged it rather than go to jail for a longer time because he insisted that he had used real magic? Of course, to deny his magic, it would have been necessary for the healer to show he did the trick, and this was something impossible for him to do as there was no trick. Summary. Under the classification of fire immunity through magic, there must be mentioned again the inconclusive tests of firewalkers made before the World War II period by Harry Price and his associates in London. From the early printed reports on the tests made in Kuda box, it is to be seen that white men were severely burned, and 3 attempts to duplicate, even in a small way, the firewalk performed by the man from India. Later on, when the Price group tested another Indian who claimed to be a firewalker, his feats were less spectacular and were safely duplicated by at least one white bystander. Price cautiously refuted his statements made after the Kuda box test because of the later fiasco with Hassan. Another excellent source of data on fire immunity is to be found in the Annals of Psychical Research. In these cases, dozens of which have been studied and reported, fire immunity was supposedly given through the agency of spirits. The famous medium D.D. Home at seances was accustomed to take live coals from fires in fireplaces and hold them in his bare hands while blowing them to a white heat. He wrapped these coals in fine linen handkerchiefs without scorching the cloth. He held his head of bushy hair in the flames of the fireplace, burning not a hair. He held fresh flowers in the flames without having them wither. A recent book written around his life and experiences tells of these and other magical matters. Fire immunity, whether gained through prayer to a superhuman being or through the agency of deceased human spirit, presumably making such a prayer, is the result of a supranormal action, is magic. All supranormal actions are magic, whether they be instant healing, the production of psychic phenomena, telepathy, prevision, etc., or the use of the death prayer. End of chapter 2. Meet me at the next video as we continue on with this book. The next chapter will cover the incredible force used in magic, where it comes from, and some of its uses. Wouldn't you want to know? Make sure you hit like, share, and subscribe.